Welcome, everyone. My name is Jenny Marshall. I'm a product manager on Trello at Atlassian. So let's kick things off with a show of hands. Who here has ever woken up in a cold sweat the night before a big feature release? All right, well, for those of you who are thinking, I've never experienced this kind of thing before, I am extremely jealous. I'm going to need you to send me the name of your therapist when we're done here. But for those of you that did raise your hands, I am right there with you. I can definitely say that as a product manager, I've had my fair share of midnight cold sweats when thinking about big launches. That's why I called this talk what I did. You know, the saying, move fast and break things, is cute and catchy and all, but in reality, breaking users' workflows and their trust and expectations in your product isn't that fun for users or for the team that has to clean up the mess. So in this talk, I'll go over best practices for feature releases and specific tactics you can use to gain confidence that you're building the right solution for your users. So you can hopefully avoid those big surprises and broken workflows, and for some of you, the cold sweats that come with them during your big launch. A little bit about me to kick things off. As I mentioned, my name is Jenny. I live in sunny Santa Barbara, California, where I love spending time outdoors. A little bit of a shock to the system to come here and spend 4 days in a casino. Along with the rest of America during COVID, I joined the sourdough bread baking phenomena, which has been both delicious and a little bit dangerous having this much bread around. I joined Atlassian back when our logo looked like this, 6.5 years ago. I was originally on the Atlassian communications team, and I moved over to product management with Trello just over 4 years ago. During my time on Trello, I've been the product manager for a number of user-facing projects, including Trello templates and the template gallery, new user onboarding, a beta integration for video recording within Trello, and most recently, a redesign of Trello's navigation, which I'll be talking a lot about with examples today. Now, when I say user-facing, I mean a lot of users. Trello has over 90 million registered users, so that is a lot of pressure to keep them happy. Over the years, through trial and definitely some error, I have learned a few best practices for how to release iteratively and get feedback from users along the way, so that when it comes time for a big release, you can feel so confident that your solution will be well received by users that you can sleep soundly through the night. Now, I'll be sharing some of these best practices for feature releases with you in this talk, and a few ways that Atlassian tooling can help, which I presume is why most of you are at this conference. That and, getting to see human faces for the first time in 2 years. I'll walk through these 4 areas and dive into specific tactics for each, which I hope you can adapt as you see fit and incorporate into your next big feature release. And I'll be sure to leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A as well. First up, internal communication. Now, why should you even care about internal communication when you have seemingly more important things to figure out, like, writing your user stories or prioritizing your roadmap? Well, I believe strong internal communication is the most underrated and fundamental component of any successful release. Here's why. First up, solidify the strategy. Communicating to others about what you're doing and why is a really effective way for you to get laser-focused clarity on the strategy. I think it was originally Amazon that coined the practice of writing internal press releases for all their projects. And that's because if you cannot communicate succinctly what you're doing and why, it's probably a sign that there are holes in that vision and strategy that you're going to want to sort out. The second benefit of strong internal communication is that it helps you scale your team with no additional headcount. It's a freebie. The more people who know about your project and the outcomes you're trying to drive, the more eyes and ears you'll have on the ground, whether that's in other meetings, on pull requests, and Slack channels that you might not be a part of. These connections people will make for you, and they'll surface opportunities or red flags to you that you might not have known about otherwise. And the last one is it gives you more focused time. Now, if you proactively provide people with the information that they will inevitably come looking for on their own, the less you'll actually need to take time out of your day-to-day to respond to one-off messages or urgent requests for progress updates and, information on the strategy. Now, depending on your audience, you'll want to change up how and what you communicate, whether that's going super deep in the weeds with specific decisions or requirements, or providing more of a high-level summary of the vision of the project. Your job as a product manager, and very often as an engineering feature lead, is to understand who needs what information and what's the best way to deliver it to them. So let's dive into some specific tactics around internal communication, starting with your immediate team. These are the people closest to the work, so of course you'll want a pretty detailed level of communication here. At this level, I find it really helpful to create a project page in Confluence that contains detailed information on the problem, why we're doing it and what we plan on doing, what data supports our hypothesis, maybe some links to some design links. You see I have a Figma embedded in here. We kind of, as you go, you flesh this page out with your team. What are the requirements, the user stories, what dependencies do we have? Basically an all-in-one document that helps you and the team stay on the same page, quite literally, from start to finish of the project. Confluence has a great project plan template in their template library as well. Another tip for internal communication is to take advantage of team demos to stay on lockstep with your team and communicate about the project and the project goals pretty frequently. So if any of you run, weekly or biweekly team demos, this is a great opportunity for you. Now, oftentimes demos are seen as code demos, what has actually shipped. But demos are not just for engineers. On my team, we really see them as an opportunity to come together and share learnings and progress, whether that's in the code or whether that's something else. Like as a product manager, this is a perfect opportunity to share with your team any relevant updates, whether that's customer feedback you're seeing and hearing, new designs you're working through with the designer, have run through user testing, any changes to the metrics or strategy, the release rollout plan. The sky is really the limit here. Now at Trello, we use a Trello board to run our team demo meetings. So we have lists for the date of the actual demo, and then people who have something to demo will add a card to the list with their face on it, maybe a few checklist items that they want to run through in the demo. It's just a really easy way to streamline that meeting. And you'll see here in my example, this is a literal screenshot from our board where I have demoed some learnings from navigation interviews I ran on that project. Our designer jumped in to walk through some Figma files. Again, a really great way to kind of regularly check in the team and make sure everyone's on the same page about the progress that's being made. Now, you're also going to want to update stakeholders pretty regularly about your project. These people aren't quite as close to the day-to-day and may not need all the hairy details, but they'll likely want to know the goals of a project, how it's tracking, and if there are any risks or blockers that come up. A crucial component of our internal communication strategy at this level is Atlas, Atlassian's new status reporting tool. So with Atlas, we're able to go in and provide short weekly updates to keep all stakeholders who aren't quite as close to the day-to-day informed of our weekly progress. If the project's on track or at risk, and when we expect it to ship. So we go in here and we post a short and sweet 280 character update on Fridays. And then followers of the Atlas ticket will receive a Monday morning roundup email or Slack or team update for all the tickets they follow. Now, if you're working on a big project, you're probably going to have a few touch points throughout where you're going to need to communicate with a larger audience, whether that's multiple departments, the business unit, or even the entire organization. So with this audience who's not as close to the day-to-day of the project, the key is to keep your communication high level, touching on why this project is strategically important, what success for users and the business looks like, and maybe the design vision for where we're headed. At Atlassian, we rely heavily on Confluence to share these kind of high-level strategy pages or blog posts to keep people informed on that larger vision. That way people can comment, ask clarifying questions on the page, of course, litter all your great ideas with emoji reactions. Now, in addition to helping you kind of formulate the strategy, while you're writing this page, I find that it's actually going to save you time in the long run to craft this sort of blog post, because people may come to you asking about the general rationale of the project at various points throughout its life cycle, and you can easily send them this page to give them background on the strategy, rather than kind of rehashing it through Slack or meetings each time. This page will also appear as people search for your project name in Confluence, so they may not even need to even come searching for you. They can just kind of get the information they need through a Confluence search. In addition to communicating with Confluence pages, I really love to use async video recording. In this case, I use Loom a lot to provide visual, digestible updates for people to consume on their own time. Some people are more readers, and a Confluence blog post works really well for that. Other people kind of are retain information better if they hear it and see it. So I'll often post, snippets of the progress we're making, remind people about the goals of the project through short little video clips. So to wrap up, communication is important from day one. Just keep in mind who your audience is, what information they need to know, and then what's the best format and cadence to deliver them that information, whether it's, short and sweet weekly updates, longer form written content, live demos, or video. Moving on to controlled rollouts. So to build up confidence in a large release, ideally you'll be validating your solution along the way with actual users rather than building in a black box and then releasing something all at once. For larger or riskier projects, controlled rollouts are a key element of iterative development to minimize risk and maximize learnings. So let's touch on the benefits of controlled rollouts before we dive into some tactics. First up, they let you learn from specific cohorts of users. So when you have a product of thousands or millions of users like Trello, it's likely that not every feature you release will affect or be used by all users in the same way. So choosing specific cohorts to release to first can help you stay focused on what exactly you need to learn and validate at the beginning of a project, and then help you prioritize which user stories to build first in order to test out those assumptions. Rolling out your feature in a controlled way also allows for really an easy way to measure progress as you go. So kind of tracking the same metrics as you roll out to a cohort and then expand the rollout, and kind of keep an eye on those metrics and understand if you're tracking towards your goals or if you kind of need to course correct and regroup and potentially take a different approach. And then lastly, I love that controlled rollouts help mitigate risk. And smaller cohorts are great because in the chance that you do break something, you're affecting far fewer users, and it's also easier to revert the changes, do customer outreach if necessary among a really small controlled set of users rather than your big GA launch. So here was what our different release phases looked like for the Trello navigation project. It was critical for us at Trello to maintain a really high bar for user experience, balancing moving fast with not breaking a lot of things. So this controlled rollout actually took place over the course of a year, but in that time we were constantly shipping and learning, just among very small, very controlled releases. You can learn a lot while keeping cohorts small. I'm talking about 600 users at a time were our early release cohorts. So the number of phases of your release may also change based on new information and feedback you receive along the way. So with Trello, actually, for the navigation, our original release plan did not look anything like this. We are actually we're going to go out to internal, then we're going to go out to new users first because they've never experienced any other navigation, so they won't know the difference. And then we're going to do a GA launch. That is ill-advised. Luckily, we woke up to the problems with that early on and took a different path where we actually went out to very small cohorts of what we deemed high-risk users, existing users who would need to learn a whole new navigation system, who had lots of work already in Trello, and we needed to ensure that they could really quickly and easily find that work when we introduced the new navigation system. So, we course corrected our rollout plan and added in a bunch of these small, higher risk cohorts. I think we even had more than I'm even picturing here, because as we learned new things from users and we learned that our solution wasn't quite cutting it, so we needed to iterate, collect more feedback, expand to another group, see how that improved solution landed with them, and then keep going from there. So how will you know when it is time to release to your next cohort and gradually expand that release? Well, we set graduation criteria for what we wanted to see. This could be quantitative, like usage metrics, but it could also be around qualitative feedback. And this is more likely when you're keeping your cohorts really small, like we kept them at 600 users, you're probably going to focus more on that qualitative feedback in the early days. So in our case, our primary graduation criteria centered around customer satisfaction with the navigation experience. So for each cohort, we'd receive an average score of how this new navigation compared to the old one. We would track the graduation criteria for each cohort on a Confluence page, laying out the primary and secondary metrics that we were keeping our eye on, baselines from the previous milestone that we released to, and whether or not we were on track to hit this graduation criteria. Now, having all the criteria laid out on a Confluence page like this helped the whole team and stakeholders know how we were measuring success and kept us honest. Did we actually hit our graduation criteria? Are we ready to expand the cohort? Or do we need to take a little bit more time to iterate and improve our solution before we open it up to more users? We would also track each release cohort in its own Atlas ticket to update stakeholders weekly on the improvements we were shipping to each cohort, what the feedback we were receiving looked like, and how we were tracking towards that graduation criteria. Again, really easy way to keep stakeholders informed of our progress without needing to, update everyone individually on meetings or in Slack. So here is how we kept track and we measured success of that customer satisfaction score across all of our cohorts. And I'm happy to report it shows a success story where, we originally shipped internally pretty early on, and I would say we moved fast and we definitely broke some things. We had a lot of internal users who did not love the experience. And as we kind of learned from them what wasn't working, we iterated, we gradually expanded to very small cohorts of users and learned along the way. We saw that customer satisfaction score build up to the point where we felt confident that the experience was ready for a general availability launch. So to recap here, shipping iteratively is really fundamental to agile development. Identifying the right cohorts to release to along the way can help you prioritize who you're really building for and need to learn from, and what outcomes you're trying to measure. Then setting appropriate graduation criteria should give you signal on whether you're building towards that ideal solution along the way. Hopefully you won't break too much for these small early release cohorts, but if you do, remember at least it's for a small handful of users that you can communicate with rather than your entire user base. Of course, to gain confidence in the solution you're building, you want to collect vast amounts of user feedback along the way. The right tooling can help you manage this feedback collection process. In this section, I'll go over tactics for collecting, organizing, and actioning on feedback. Now, at Trello, we are kind of obsessed with using everything. So we dog food our product almost religiously, and it makes for a lot of great internal feedback. But of course, eventually, we also need to get out of our own bubble and test our solutions among actual users. So I'm going to walk through a couple tactics for both internal and external feedback collection. Now, I said we'd like to use Trello for everything at Trello, and one of the use cases I love is using a Trello board to collect internal feedback. So here, anyone in the workspace can join this board and contribute to it as they can test out our solution. This Trello board is a really transparent way to receive feedback and also communicate outwards what's already on your team's radar or in the backlog. So it's kind of a two-way street there. People come to this board, they kind of scan it for any feedback that others have already left, and maybe they upvote it, maybe they comment and add, this is happening to you too. They can also scan it for the known issues that we're already aware of, so they don't need to, bombard our board with, duplicate material. And then, they'll come in here and add their own cards of feedback that might not have been on our radar before. Additionally, we used a survey to collect feedback. Now, there are, of course, many ways out there to collect qualitative feedback, whether that's user interviews, user testing, social media forums. But for consistency across all of our cohorts of expanded releases, we found the best way was a survey to keep those survey questions the same across all users. Now, just remember, where you put this survey out in the world will help you learn different things. So let's take a look at the two main channels we used to collect qualitative feedback for the navigation project. We left this survey as a link in our product, and we emailed it out proactively to users. Now, if you place a link in your product to passively capture users who have feedback, this is more likely to yield kind of what's on fire. You're placing a direct line of communication between you and the user because you want to hear of any issues quickly and you want a really, really tight feedback loop to hear maybe what's not working. You're also kind of acting as a shield between the users and the support team. So you kind of hear about anything first, and then your poor support team doesn't need to be bombarded with requests. I just want you to think about the last time you followed an in-app link to leave feedback. Was it because you were super happy with the experience, everything was working awesome? Or is it because something was not working for you and you wanted the team to know about it? Now, on the flip side, proactively asking users for feedback over, for example, over email, including a survey in an email. This is going to help you learn more about the overall sentiment among a more generalized population who may not have come to you with their thoughts otherwise. This is helpful for helping you extrapolate how the larger user base may view this change when it comes time for a general availability launch. Now, neither channel is better or worse for collecting feedback. They serve different purposes, which is why we relied on both. Just to illustrate my point here, our customer satisfaction score from survey responses from the two channels varied greatly. Our in-product responses were from more frustrated users who were experiencing specific pain points and let us know about it. And that was incredibly useful, so we could learn, what was not working. And then the email responses were from a wider user base who were generally fine with the changes, or even maybe they loved the changes, but they wouldn't have reached out on their own. Again, both channels are really helpful to learn different things. So how do you organize all this feedback and make sense of it? Well, this is why I love to use surveys, especially when you're talking about groups of users that starts getting in the hundreds or thousands, because these roundup summaries from the survey will help you get an overall picture of trends. But of course, in that survey, you're also going to want to leave space for open-ended feedback. Now, for this open-ended feedback, in order to avoid over-indexing on any one piece of really loud or really angry feedback, we take all of these responses out and use a whiteboarding tool to kind of group them by theme. It's so easy to read a piece of feedback that's like, I hate this thing, I'm leaving Trello, I'm going to your competitor. And that's a gut punch. But you can kind of spin your wheels trying to make that one user happy, when in reality, you don't want to focus on the larger trends that most customers are experiencing and that you can prioritize first in your roadmap. So this is where, grouping in a whiteboarding tool becomes really helpful. So to action on that feedback, we then pull those themes that we were seeing through whiteboarding, we pull them out into a Confluence page so we can document, whether we plan to incorporate them into our roadmap. If so, we might link our backlog tickets here just for visibility. Otherwise, we'd provide clear documentation on, maybe a theme we were seeing and why we weren't necessarily going to address it. Maybe it wasn't strategically in line, maybe it was going to be addressed by another team's project, etc. Now, one thing that's inevitably going to come up are tough decisions for how to address certain areas of feedback. You might not always know what direction to take. There could be several options. So when this comes up, I love using a Confluence page as a way to source insights and ideas from our teammates. So we go in here and we provide some background on the problem space, any context necessary to help folks make a decision, and then lay out several options along with the pros and cons that we're considering. Then you share this with your teammates and colleagues so that they can weigh in on comments and, perhaps they're close enough to the problem space. Perhaps they're also dogfooding your solution and have thoughts of their own. And, I find this a really effective way to kind of get more ideas in the room and then sort of come to a consensus on an option that makes sense. So some of our best discussions for how to address certain areas of feedback started on a Confluence page. And then from there, it's super easy to, maybe call a 30-minute Zoom meeting and sign off on a decision or a direction. But it really can help you save time in meetings by doing it this way. All right, so we know that a critical part of Agile development is hearing from customers. The right tooling can help you manage this feedback collection process and make sense of it all so you can incorporate it into your roadmap. But now we're at the point where we've cycled through the build, measure, learn loop multiple times we've released to small cohorts, we've learned via their feedback, we've adjusted our roadmap with the necessary improvements. Of course, there's always more perfecting to do, but at some point, it's time to release new value to all customers and start seeing the business benefits. But this launch is often the most terrifying. What if users hate it? What if someone screams at you on Twitter? God forbid. Which leads me to my last point, catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is psychology speak for pessimism. This is the stage where you anticipate everything that could still go wrong. When it comes to feature releases, there's actually some real upside in being a pessimist, because the more you anticipate in advance what can go wrong, the more you can effectively plan for it before it does. Those of you who already wake up in cold sweats in the middle of the night, I'm happy to say that catastrophizing should come pretty naturally to you. But my goal here is to equip you with some tactics for effective catastrophizing during working hours, not in the middle of the night. So one of the most effective ways to catastrophize is by running a pre-mortem with your team. This is basically a therapy session with the team where everyone spills what could possibly go wrong and what keeps them up at night. Then as a team, you kind of pick out the riskiest ones, or which are most likely to happen, and map out mitigation strategies to adequately plan for them in advance. Confluence has a really great template for this as well in their template library. Another tactic is to anticipate what users are likely to ask about this change, so you can adequately equip your customer-facing teams like support with resources. But also, thinking through what customers are likely to ask you is a really great way for you to identify any blind spots that you might not have thought about does your solution kind of not address something that the customers might be expecting? And then from there, you can kind of think are there any other quick wins we should incorporate into this launch? Do we need to pause for a second and realize, why don't we have a response for these customers? Or kind of work with your customer-facing teams to identify how you might approach these responses. So, drafting a document like this for your support or marketing teams, not only is the right thing to do, being a great team player and, giving these teams what they need to be successful, but it helps you identify blind spots maybe ahead of launch. So this last one, a bug blitz, this last one may seem a bit obvious. Test your solution before you release to thousands or millions of users. But ahead of large releases, we always run a team bug blitz to detect any bugs. So we have 10 sets of eyes searching for issues rather than just one QA person. So how it works is our QA person will put together this Trello board of, what are we testing? How do we go about setting up configuring our environments to test it? And then she'll list a number of scenarios that we want to make sure to test. So each of us will kind of grab a browser, we'll make sure to test in multiple, and then we'll stay on a call for 30, 45 minutes, and we'll go through all the scenarios, and we'll add bugs to the needs triage list as we find them. And then towards the end of the call, we'll all kind of regroup and we'll run through all the bugs we found, and we'll determine together if we think they are blockers for release, or if they just need a ticket in the backlog, or if they're not worth prioritizing a fix for. So just remember, catastrophizing with your team during working hours, not in the middle of the night, can actually be a really effective way to see around corners and anticipate what can go wrong, so you can course correct before it does. So I just want to recap here. We've gone over these four best practices for successful feature releases, including strong internal communication and why it matters. So it helps you really hone in on the strategy. It can save you time. It can help you get more eyes and ears on the ground to identify opportunities or blockers. We've talked about controlled rollout, the benefits of controlled rollouts, and some tactics to apply to ensure you're learning the most along the way. We've talked through how to collect, organize, and action on feedback. And then my favorite, catastrophizing, to anticipate what can go wrong and plan for it before it does. Following these best practices should help you gain confidence that you're building towards the right solution for the vast majority of your user base, so you can iterate and learn and avoid breaking things for a whole bunch of users. And hopefully it helps you skip out on those late night cold sweats ahead of launch day. I hope you feel empowered to employ some of these tactics for your next product or feature release. Thanks so much.